guys! Welcome to ACT. So for this video, ang pag-aaralan natin is about the theorems on rectangle. So before that, i-define muna natin what is a rectangle. When we say rectangle, it is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. So ibig sabihin, ang isang rectangle ay isang equiangular parallelogram. So ano ba ibig sabihin pag sinabing equiangular? When we say equiangular, meaning that all angles are congruent. So let's take a look at this given example. Let's say that this is a rectangle A, B, C, D. So kung mapapansin natin, lahat ng given angles dito sa rectangle na to ay right angle. And we all know that all right angles are congruent. Dahil lahat ng right angle ay nagme-measure ng 90 degrees. That's why a rectangle is considered to be an equiangular parallelogram. Okay? Kasi nga lahat ng kanyang angles ay congruent. Okay? So, for the rectangle, we have two theorems. So, theorem number 1 states that if a parallelogram has one right angle, then it has 4 right angles and the parallelogram is a rectangle. So, theorem number 2 states that the diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. And take note that when we say theorem, it is a statement that needs to be proven before being accepted. So, kailangan muna nating i-prove yung dalawang theorem na to bago natin i-accept. Okay? And we need to prove this para magamit din natin sa pagpuprove pa ng mga iba pang given theorems sa mga susunod pa nating topics. Okay? So, let's have the proof for theorem number 1, which states that, again, if a parallelogram has one right angle, then it has 4 right angles and the parallelogram is a rectangle. So, let's say we are given the parallelogram wins. Wins is a parallelogram with angle W, a right angle. And we need to prove that angle I, angle N, and angle S are right angles. So, let's consider this given figure. So, given ang angle W ay right angle, this is a parallelogram. So, we need to prove na itong angle na to, angle I, angle N, and angle S are also right angle. So, let's have the proof. Okay. So, meron na tayong mga hints dito. Meron na mga given statements na kailangan nating bigyan ng reason. At meron namang given reasons na kailangan nating ilagay ang statements. Okay? So, for number 1, ang reason natin ay yung given natin. Okay? So, ano nga ulit yung given natin? That wins is a parallelogram with angle W to be a right angle. So, from statement number 1, ang statement number 2 natin dito, ang sabi that the measure of angle W is equal to 90 degrees. Why? Ano kaya yung reason natin? So, for the reason, definition of right angle. So, alam naman natin that when we say right angle, it all measures 90 degrees. Since right angle ang angle W, nagme-measure yan ng 90 degrees. Okay? So, for number 3, hint natin, given ang reason in a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So, ano ba yung mga pairs ng opposite angles natin dito? So, we have the statement, angle W is congruent to angle N. So, opposite angles yan. And angle I is congruent to angle S. Okay? Dahil nga, in a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So, since congruent yan, pwede nating sabihin that the measure of angle W is equal to the measure of angle N, since congruent nga yung dalawang angles. And that the measure of angle I is equal to the measure of angle S, for the reason of congruent angles. Pag ang dalawang angle ay congruent, ibig sabihin meron yang equal measures. Okay? So for number 5, we are given that the measure of angle N is 90 degrees. Why? For the reason, so substitution from statement numbers 2 and 4. Ano bang sabi sa number 2? That the measure of angle W is equal to 90. And alam naman natin sa number 4 na ang measure ng angle W ay equal sa measure ng angle N. sinubstitute lang natin yung measure ng angle W, which is 90. So, yun yung measure ng angle N. Okay? So, for number 6, we are given that the measure of angle W plus the measure of angle I is equal to 180 degrees. So, nasan ba itong dalawang angles na to? We have angle W and angle I. So, they are consecutive angles. And we all know that in a parallelogram, consecutive angles are supplementary. When we say supplementary, their sum should be equal to 180 degrees. Okay? So, for number 7, so we have 90 plus the measure of angle I is equal to 180. So, under the reason, substitution from statement numbers 2 and 6. So, ano ba yung sa number 6? Measure ng angle W. Given na yan sa number 2 na ang measure ng angle W ay 90 degrees. So, sinubstitute lang natin dito. That's why we have 90 plus the measure of angle I is equal to 180 degrees. Okay? So, for number 8, we have the reason reflexive property. So, we have 90 is equal to 90. Okay? For number 9, we are given that the measure of angle I is equal to 90 degrees. Saan naman kaya nanggaling ito? So, we have the reason SPE or subtraction property of equality from statement number 7. So, galing yan dito. Itong 90 na to, kailangan ilipat sa kabila. So, by SPE or subtraction property of equality, nag-minus tayo ng 90 on both sides of the equation. So, magkakaroon tayo dito ng 180 minus 90. That's why we have 90 here. So, that the measure of angle I is equal to 90 degrees. Okay? So, for number 10, the measure of angle S is equal to 90 degrees. Substitution from statement numbers 4 and 9. So, alam naman natin, sabi sa number 4, the measure of angle I is equal to the measure of angle S. Given na yung measure ng angle I sa statement number 9, that is 90. Sinubstitute na lang natin. That's why we have the measure of angle S that is also equal to 90 degrees. Okay? So, galing dito sa statement number 5, 90, statement number 9, and statement number 10, we can now say that angle I, angle N, and angle S are right angles. Under the reason that if the measure of an angle is 90 degrees, so lahat yan ay 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Okay? Kaya nasabi natin na yung tatlong angles na to ay right angle. Okay? So, we can now say that wins is a rectangle under the definition of rectangle. Okay? So, this is the proof of theorem number 1. Ibig sabihin, pwede na natin gamitin tong theorem na to in proving other theorems. Okay? Since na-prove na natin. Let's have theorem number 2. For theorem number 2, the diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. So, let's say we are given that wins is a rectangle with diagonals WN and SI. So, we need to prove that WN is congruent to SI. So, itong dalawang diagonal na to, kailangan nating i-prove na yan ay congruent. Okay? So, let's have the proof. So, number 1, again, given. Ano yung given natin? That wins is a rectangle with diagonals WN and SI. Okay? Next, number 2, we are given that WS is congruent to IN. Saan ba yan? We have WS is congruent to IN. Anong pairs of segment ito? So, sabi sa reason, in a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. So, since WS is the opposite side of side IN, therefore, they are congruent. Okay? Next, angle WSN. Saan yun? WSN. So, yung angle na to. And angle INS. INS. They are right angles. Okay? For the reason, so theorem number 1, yung pinrove natin kanina, kapag may isang angle na right angle, ibig sabihin lahat yan ay right angle. At dahil nga rectangle yung ating given parallelogram, ibig sabihin lahat yan ay right angle. Kaya itong dalawang to ay right angle. So dahil yung dalawang yan ay right angle, statement number 4, we can now say that angle WSN is congruent to angle I and S. For the reason, all right angles are congruent since all right angles measures 90 degrees. Okay? Next, we have segment SN. Asa ba yung SN? To side SN is congruent to side NS. For the reason, reflexive property. So, congruent yung side na to sa side na to. Congruent yung angle na to at yung angle na to. And yung side na to sa side na to. Okay? So, we can now say, under the SAS congruence postulate, that triangle WSN, so WSN, triangle na to, is congruent to triangle INS. Yung triangle naman na to. Under the SAS congruence postulate. So, dahil congruent yung dalawang triangle na to, we can now say that WN is congruent to SI. Under what reason? Under CPCTC, or meaning, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay? So, the corresponding parts of two congruent triangles are congruent. Okay? So, na-prove na natin yung theorem number 2. Since na-prove na natin yung dalawang theorems ng ating rectangle, pwede na natin yan gamitin in proving other theorems ng iba pa nating parallelogram or quadrilateral. Okay? So, let's now proceed in solving problems involving theorems on rectangle. So, this time, magsasolve na tayo. So, for example, number 1. So, we are given rectangle QRST. Itong rectangle na to. So, meron tayong given that if the measure of angle QRT, so asan yun? Ito, QRT is 25 degrees. So, ang measure daw ni QRT ay 25 degrees. What is the measure? Let's try to find the measure of angle TRS. Nasaan yun? We have angle TRS. Itong angle na to, TRS. Ano daw ang measure nito? And angle RTS. What is the measure of this angle? Okay? So, dun muna tayo kay letter A. So, we need to find letter A. We need to find the measure of angle TRS. So, we all know that the measure of angle QRS is equal to 90 degrees. Ito, yung QRS. Okay? That is a right angle. Why? Kasi ito ay isang rectangle. So, since QRS is 90 degrees, we can say that the measure of angle QRT plus the measure of angle TRS is equal to the measure of angle QRS. Yung measure ng angle na to plus yung measure ng angle na to ay measure ng buong angle na to. Okay? So, given yung measure ng ating QRT, substitute na lang natin. The measure of angle QRT, itong nasa given, the measure of QRT is 25 degrees plus, so hinahanap natin yung measure ni angle TRS. And the measure of angle QRS is, ito, we have 90 degrees. So, if we're going to solve, i-apply natin yung SPE. Magsusubtract tayo ng 25 on both sides of the equation. Okay? May SPE para makancel natin ito. Ang matira dito ay measure of angle TRS. Okay? So, ang sabi dito, the measure of angle TRS is 90 minus 25. Okay? So, kung isa-solve natin yan, we can say that the measure of angle TRS, 90 minus 25, that will give us 65 degrees. Therefore, the measure of angle TRS is 65 degrees. Okay? So, next, let's have letter B. For letter B, we need to find the measure of angle RES. Ito naman ngayon yung hahanapin natin. Nasaan yun? We have R, T, and S. So, ang given lang natin is that QRT is 25 degrees. Kung papansinin natin, this is a parallelogram. And we all know that in a parallelogram, opposite sides are parallel. Okay? And alam naman natin that if parallel lines is cut by a transversal, itong diagonal natin na to, the alternate interior angles are congruent. Meaning, we can say that the measure of angle QRT is equal to the measure of angle RTS. Since they are congruent. Kasi alternate interior yan. Okay? So, kung isa-substitute natin that the measure of angle QRT is 25 degrees, so the measure of angle RTS is also equal to 25 degrees. Since angle RTS is congruent to angle QRT. Okay? By alternate interior angles that are congruent. Okay? Next, let's have example number 2. So, we are given rectangle ABCD with diagonals AC and BD that meet at point E. So, ang given natin, we are given that the measure of diagonal AC is 14 centimeters for letter A. We need to find the measure of diagonal BD. Okay? So, we all know that a rectangle is a parallelogram. And in a parallelogram, diagonals are congruent. Ibig sabihin, kung ano ang measure ng AC, yun din ang measure ng BD. Since AC is congruent to BD. Since in a parallelogram, the diagonals are congruent. Kaya, whatever the measure of AC, that will be equal to the measure of the other diagonal BD. So, given ang measure ng AC, that is equal to 14 centimeters. Therefore, the measure of diagonal BD is also equal to 14 centimeters. Okay? Next, for letter B, we need to find the measure of AE. So, ito naman yung hahanapin natin. Asan ba yung AE? So, from D, this one, up to this one. So, ano daw ang measure nito? So, ang sabi ng theorem number 2 natin, the diagonals bisect each other. Ibig sabihin, they divide the other diagonal into two congruent parts. So, kung ang AC, diagonal AC, yung buong diagonal na to, measures 14 centimeters, i-divide lang natin sa dalawa. Kasi kung ano man ang measure ng AE, yun din ang measure ng CE. Kasi nga, BD bisect AC. Okay? So, ang measure ng AC ay 14. Therefore, the measure of segment AE is equal to 7 centimeters. Since 14 divided by 2 is equal to 7 centimeters. Okay? Okay. So, next example. So, given rectangle QRSE with diagonals QS and RT that meet at point U. So, meron tayong given dito that QS is equal to 5x minus 14 centimeters. RT is equal to 4x plus 6 centimeters. So, letter A, we need to find the value of x. Okay? So, for the value of x, gagamitin natin yung mga given natin. The measure of diagonal QS and the measure of diagonal RT. So, we all know that in a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. So, QS is congruent to RT. So, therefore, the measure of diagonal QS is equal to the measure of diagonal RT. So, substituting the given values for QS, we have 5x minus 14. And for RT, we have 4x plus 6. So, pagsasama-samahin lang natin yung common terms. Lahat ng may variables on the left side and lahat ng constant will be on the right side. So, we have here 5x. So, lipat natin yung positive 4x. It will become negative 4x is equal to, we have 6. So, pag nilipat natin yung negative 14, it will become positive 14. So, we have now 5x minus 4x. This will give us x is equal to, we have 6 plus 14, and that is equal to 20. So, this is now the value of x. Okay? So, for letter B, we need to find the measure of diagonal QS. So, given naman yung measure ng ating diagonal QS, we have the measure 5x minus 14 centimeters. So, for us to get the value of diagonal QS, isa-substitute lang natin yung given value ng x na nasolve natin kanina. So, we have the measure of diagonal QS, which is 5, multiplied by the value of x, that is 20, minus 14 centimeters. So, we have 5 times 20, this will give us 100 minus 14 centimeters. So, if we're going to subtract 100 and 14, we can now get that the measure of diagonal QS is equal to 86 centimeters. So, this is now the measure of diagonal QS. So, that's for letter B. For letter C, ang hahanapin naman natin ay ang measure ng diagonal RT. So, since the diagonals are congruent, tingnan natin kung ang makukuha rin nating measure ng diagonal RT ay 86 centimeters. So, substituting the values, we have the measure of diagonal RT, that is 4x plus 6 centimeters. Substitute lang natin yung value ng x. We have 4 times the value of x is 20 plus 6 centimeters. So, multiplying 4 and 20, that will give us 80 plus 6 centimeters. So, if we're going to add 80 plus 6, we have the measure of diagonal RT, that is equal to 86 centimeters. Okay? So, since diagonal RT is congruent to diagonal QS, we have the same measures for diagonal QS and diagonal RT, that is 86 centimeters. Okay? So, that's all for this video. I hope you learned something. God bless!